Hello, advanced human anatomy and physiology students. Now we begin chapter 9. There is a great deal of information in this chapter. It is all on the muscular system. As you could see, this is one PowerPoint lecture slideshow of two for this chapter. Overall, what we will do is the first part will look at a lot of the microscopic structure of muscle. Some of it you have learned in histology. We'll elaborate on that, so we'll build upon what we've learned from histology. We'll get into the physiology aspects of it, and then we will start to look at the actual, by the end of the chapter, various muscles within the human body. Much of the lectures will be placed online for you to watch and take notes from. A lot of the in-class activities will reinforce these concepts. We will also do a number of labs, including the dissection of the cat with the muscular system. So pretty much a lot of the class time will be devoted to hands-on application stuff. The lectures will be your responsibility to learn and take notes on at home. Overall, there is almost 10 subsections in this chapter, beginning with 9.1, which is an introduction, and then we get into 9.2, the structure of the skeletal muscle. 9.3 is the skeletal muscle contraction. 9.4 will be muscular responses to that. 9.5 will be looking at smooth muscles. 9.6 is the cardiac muscle, and 9.7 is the skeletal muscles. We end with 9.8 looking at the major skeletal muscles, and 9.9 lifespan changes that we see with the muscular system. So 9.1 introduction to the muscular system. You have learned these in histology. There are three types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. The muscular system itself, all body movements do require muscle. Overall, muscle actions also provide muscle tone. Muscle actions propel body fluids and food. Muscle actions generate the heartbeat, and muscle actions distribute heat. So there are all things that actions of muscles do. So again, it's to provide muscle tone, propel body fluids and food, generate the heartbeat, distribute heat. The three major types are characterized here. You could also see in table 9.2 on page 310 characteristics of muscle tissues. So just a quick recap, you can see that skeletal muscle, usually attached to bones. It's a voluntary, somatic, and striated. Cardiac muscle, it's the wall of the heart. It's an involuntary action. It's an autonomic response, and it is striated as well. You have the smooth muscle then, another involuntary response, makes up the walls of the most viscera, blood vessels, and skin. It's part of the autonomic response, and it's a non-striated muscle type. The skeletal muscle looking under, there you can see the striations, a number of nuclei in the muscle fibers that are a little bit on the periphery there. Cardiac muscle, there you can see those intercalated discs in the skeletal muscle or in the cardiac muscle that are going to allow it, all those muscle fibers, to contract in unison with each other. Cardiac muscle, there you can see how they're branched, and the nuclei of the cardiac muscle. And then, of course, the smooth muscle, lacking those striations that we do see in both skeletal and cardiac muscle. All right, so let's take a look at the structure of skeletal muscle. Each skeletal muscle is an organ made up of skeletal fibers, connective tissue, coverings, blood vessels, and nerve fibers. So the organ of the muscular system includes the skeletal muscle tissue, nervous tissue, blood, and its vessels and those connective tissue coverings. Connective tissue coverings include these three components. We do have tendons. You could see the tendons there in the diagram. You see aponeuroses. So the aponeuroses are indicated in there as well. And then you have the fascia. And we'll look at that a little bit more. But basically, fascia is a very tough fibrous connective tissue layer that is going to help cover the muscle. So you do have superficial, that's coverings near that is more external, and then you have deep fascia or coverings that are located further in. Connective tissue coverings. So if we break it down, we do have muscle coverings. We have the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. The epimysium is going to surround the whole muscle. The perimysium is going to surround the fascicles within the muscle. And the endomysium is going to surround the muscle fiber cells within those fascicles. So if we look at how it's broken down, you see you have the muscles, and then the muscles themselves have fascicles, and the fascicles are then composed of those muscle fibers with cells, and then you have these things called myofibrils, and then you have the thin and thin filaments, which would be the actin and myosin filaments that we'll talk about a little bit later. So each muscle fiber or cell is wrapped in a thin, delicate layer of connective tissue called the endomysium. And you can see that down in here. So you can see how each muscle fiber or cell is wrapped in that thin, delicate layer of endomysium tissue. Ultimately, then, what would happen is many muscle fibers are then bundled together into groups that are collectively called fascicles. Here you can see a picture of a fascicle. Each fascicle is then wrapped in a second layer of connective tissue that is made of collagen, and that would make up what we call the perimysium. And then beyond that, you have many fascicles bundled together to form the skeletal muscle. Each skeletal muscle is covered by a third layer of dense fibrous tissue called the epimysium. So here you can see all those fascicles bundled together. So you have an endomysium, the perimysium, and the epimysium. And collectively, these all come together and would also help to make up that tendon. So each skeletal muscle is then covered by a fourth very tough layer of connective tissue called the deep fascia. And the deep fascia may extend past the length of the muscle fiber. And when you have it extend past that deep fascia, extend past the length of those muscle fibers, that would make up a tendon or an aponeurosis. Aponeurosis. Basically, what that does then, it attaches that muscle to a bone, cartilage, or to another muscle. Skeletal muscle fibers continue. If we look at the fibers themselves, remember that each skeletal muscle fibers possess these striations. And a muscle fiber is a long, thin cell, and in there, each muscle fiber is composed of things called myofibrils. Each myofibril is then composed of those two types of proteins, ones that we call the thick and thin filaments. And what we see here is the thick filaments are composed of the protein myosin, And the thin filaments are primarily composed of the protein actin. So the thick and thin myofilaments are composed of the actin and myosin proteins. In addition to that, you do have striations. And what causes those striations in the skeletal muscle? Um, those are caused by the arrangement of those thick and thin filaments within the myofibrils. So you could start to see some of these the striations here. And what happens is the striations are given names. So you have the A band and what you would refer to as the I band. The A band is going to be a dark area, so you can see the darker striations. This is overlapping of thick and thin filaments. And then you have this area of I band, which is a light area, which is just thin filaments alone. The length of each myofibril is then divided into things called sarcomeres. And basically what will happen then is the sarcomeres are going to meet one another at an area called the Z line. And you can see the Z line better right in here. So you can see that Z line right here. So the thick filaments equal the protein myosin. These are going to be rod-like tail or axis that is going to terminate into two globular heads, or what we would collectively call cross bridges. And this will make more sense when we look at muscle contraction. The myosin head or cross bridges are going to interact with the active sites on the thin filaments that is going to make a linkage between the thick and thin filaments. The thin filaments themselves consist of the protein actin. They have this coiled helical structure. It resembles twisted strands or pearls. You do have some things there called, and if we come back here, you can see the names. The thin filaments are coiled. They have the names tropomyosin. Tropomyosin is basically the rod-shaped protein spiraling around actin, and it supports as a backbone, which is going to help stabilize it. You do have another one called troponin. You can see that down here. And basically what the troponin is going to do, it's going to be, it is a complex of polypeptides. So a complex of polypeptides that we're going to have one bind to actin, one is going to bind to the tropomyosin, and then one is going to help bind to calcium ions. Both tropomyosin and troponin are going to help control actin's interaction with myosin during contraction. All right, I wanted to come back to this area. So some other terms that you see in here are things like sarcolemma, sarcoplasm, transverse tubules, a sarcomere with the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this thing called the triad. And you have the cisternane of the sarcoplasmic reticulum and these T-tubules. So ultimately, what is going on, further describing in this picture, skeletal muscle fibers within the sarcoplasm of a muscle fiber, there are two specialized membranous organelles. Now, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, is the same as the endoplasmic reticulum in other cells. But because we're looking at it in a muscle cell now, we give it this fancy dancy name. So basically, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is, if you recall, a network of membranous channels that's going to surround each myofibril and run parallel to it. So you could see the sarcoplasmic reticulums there in the drawing. It is the same as the ER in other cells. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum has high concentration of calcium ions compared to the sarcoplasm. Now, the sarcoplasm itself is, just simply put, the cytoplasm of a cell. So if you have the sarcoplasmic reticulum having a high concentration of calcium ions compared to the sarcoplasm itself, basically what you have taking place there is active transport. And that is maintained by active transport, or what we can call here the calcium pump. When stimulated by muscle impulses, the membranes become more permeable as an impulse is going to travel down that membrane. And what happens is these voltage channel gates to calcium ions and will enable the calcium ions to diffuse out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the sarcoplasm itself. The other thing that you have going on here is this thing called transverse tubules, abbreviated TT. The transverse tubules essentially are a set of membranous channels that are going to extend into the sarcoplasm as invaginations. It's a continuous with the muscle fiber membranes. So basically what's going to happen there, the muscle cell membrane, or what we would call the sarcolemma, so that's the special name, the sarcolemma is the special name given to the membrane here, the membrane of the muscle cell. So these transverse tubules are going to basically invaginate in to the muscle cell, and transverse tubules are going to be filled, because they're coming in from the outside, they're going to be filled with that extracellular fluid, and it's going to extend deep into the muscle cell. So each transverse tubule runs between two large portions of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And what you get there then, when you have the transverse tubules running between the sarcoplasmic reticulum, you get this thing called the cisternae. And you could see that right here, the cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. In addition to that, you have the structures that form a triad near a region where the actin and myosin overlap. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum and these things called the transverse tubules are involved in the process of activating muscle contraction. And we'll look at that mechanism a little bit. Because one transverse tubule is associated with two sarcoplasmic reticulums, that's where we get that triad term from. All right, so we jumped between a couple slides there so you could pick up a little bit of the different terminology associated with skeletal muscle, basic anatomy of what's going on there. So some of these things you should be familiar with. It's just a newer name, and because it's more associated with the muscle cells themselves. So we are going to pick up with section 9.3. We'll look at muscle contraction regarding skeletal muscle. We'll talk about that a thing called the neuromuscular junction. And then we'll talk about how we get that stimulus. So we'll talk about relating these things that we discussed in this lecture to what happens with electrical impulses that come through at the neuromuscular junction to excite that membrane for the permeability of those calcium ions. And then we get that interaction of the myosin and actin filaments through these crossbred linkages to pull those fibers. So we'll pull that all together, hopefully looking at 9.3, which is a pretty heavy unit, all focused on muscle contraction and energy for that contraction and what muscle contraction allows for as far as oxygen supply, respiration, oxygen debt, muscle fatigue, and heat production. Some of those things that we looked at first, as far as what the muscular system can do. So that is it for right now. Have a great day, everybody, and we will continue on with the muscular system.